I don't have to tell you that today's workplace and workforce has and is undergoing massive upheaval. And with this series, we're examining the multifaceted trends and issues that every company faces. We've had a couple meetings already. We examined the future of work, what talent wants. Another one, how business is reacting to talent demands. Next month, May 11th, we'll examine how technology will continue to force fundamental changes in how we work. But today's Future of Work Town Hall will examine urban planning post-pandemic and how working downtown is being redefined. And what makes this one different is, and why we call it a town hall is, we want it to be wholly interactive. We want the conversation and questions to come from you, the live audience. And so now let's get on with the program. Our guests today are Matt Rossetti and Amy Chesterton from the Rossetti firm. Rossetti, of course, is an internationally recognized design firm. Matt, wave Matt. Hello, Matt. Matt's the chief architect of Serious Fun and leads the firm's framework for innovative design thinking. Matt became president of Rossetti in 1999 and moved the headquarters to downtown Detroit in 2013. Amy, hello to Amy, I think you can figure out which one Amy is a partner in Rossetti, and her specialty is urban planning. She's got 20 years of experience leading all facets of urban planning projects for Rossetti. And our moderators today are familiar faces to all. Nolan Finley, down there on my right at the end, is the editorial page editor for the Detroit News, a co-host of DPTV's One Detroit. Stephen Henderson, right next to me, is host of Detroit Today on WDET Radio. You can listen to him every morning, and also a co-host of Detroit Public TV's One Detroit. So ladies and gentlemen, join me in a warm DEC welcome for all of our guests up here today. So to get us started, we're going to ask Matt and Amy to each just take a minute and set some context for our conversation. So let's start with Amy.
So we probably should have started by teaching you how to turn this thing on.
It's on. Yeah, it should be on.
It is on? Okay. Yeah, job one, figure out how to use the microphone. Setting the context for urban design is a notion of, when I first moved to Michigan and subsequently to Detroit, which was almost 17 years ago now, there was definitely a notion of any development is good development in Detroit. As long as we can get something built, that's a win. I definitely think that there has been a paradigm shift. Certainly need to give props to a lot of people that were making a lot of changes. Maurice Cox, for example, our mayor, that really started to set some high bars in terms of where we are deserving of quality. We've had quality. I mean, I'm embarrassed to tell you that this is the first time I've ever been on this campus before. There has always been a history of quality, and we deserve it again. And this notion of thoughtful urban development and shying away from any development as good development is definitely the approach to thoughtful urban development going forward.
Thanks, Amy. Matt, take it away.
Matt Rossetti, I'm really here to just assist Amy because she's the smart one, as you can tell, who has actually some amazing experience. And I think today's session is really going to be much more interesting and interactive with everybody asking some good questions. We hope you got some stumpers for us, but in essence, we just like to talk a little bit about what we're seeing, what we're doing in different places across the country in North America. We have projects all over in many different cities. So we get a chance to experiment and see what's going on in different places, ascertain their policies and their planning guidelines as to what helps makes great places.
That's great. Before I throw it over to Nolan, Stephen, Joni and Matt on my team, the best mic wranglers ever, identify them. So if you've got a question, Matt and Joni are nearby. They'll come up and you can use the microphone so we can all hear. So Nolan, Stephen, take it away.
Yeah, we are going to. We'll start it out, but we're hoping you'll jump right in and ask the questions you want answers to. I'll start by asking you all, in this post-pandemic environment, as you're sitting down with your clients and discussing their needs, what they want in a new building, how has those conversations changed in the post-pandemic world? How is it different today than 2019? What are they asking for today that they didn't ask for then? How are things different?
I'll jump on that to start. Interestingly enough, and I think if you go back a little bit and think about when COVID first hit, it was like a bomb went off all over the world. And for us, we kind of have two facets of work. We do sports work internationally, and we do a lot of work in Detroit and around the areas. We kind of call it our sports global and Detroit local. So obviously the entertainment world was just, they had no idea what was going on. People didn't know. I mean, there were actual owners and team presidents that thought stadiums would never open up again. And we did all kinds of experiments of how to be 6 feet apart and rearrange stadiums. Well, that never happened. They either opened halfway, or they didn't open at all. And then all of a sudden, the onslaught post-pandemic has been like nothing's ever happened. All of this interesting planning and all the ideas of hygienic surfaces that would be self-cleaning and things that inventions that came out of the woodwork just all fell by the wayside. The one thing, though, that is considerably different is the advent of downtown, the thriving nature that downtowns need to have. And I read, I don't know if you saw, there was an interesting article in the New York Times over the weekend. It's called The Doom Loop. And it was about how one bad reoccurring event, like people not coming back downtown, how it affects all of the businesses, the parking, the restaurants, the shopping, even safety, transportation, all these things without those tax coffers has a significant impact. And now that the federal funding from a lot of that stuff has gone away, it's like, okay, so we're all talking about, and we would be huge advocates of trying to bring people back downtown. We do the same thing for our staff and everybody we work with, because we need that energy, we need that buzz. And to me, it made me think about the sort of the essence of downtown. What to each of us is probably a different answer, but what is that essence of urbanity and being in a downtown scenario that we need to capture, explore, and I guess proliferate across venues. One specific example is a tower that we're working on in downtown Phoenix. It's the largest tower in Phoenix. It used to be the old Chase building. It is 600,000 square feet of office that Chase left just before the pandemic. So we had an opportunity to, okay, what is this going to be? Because we had explored different sort of office scenarios. Now what we're looking at is a really, really innovative work-live scenario where each floor, we have probably 12 different varieties, but some floors will have their work studios and their live studios on the same floor, and others will kind of have more work and then and less live, and then vice versa, mixing in, of course, community services, all of the things that folks need, grocery, hospitality, retail. So it's kind of like almost in essence its own little hub, so to speak. So folks have all that at their fingertips. It's kind of a micro example.
Amy? No?
I think we'll leave it there.
Okay. So I actually want to go back to something you were talking about, Amy, in the opening remarks, where you talked about us deserving quality, right? Deserving good. So you guys are architects, you're designers. Downtown is changing a lot. I mean, there's a lot more on the skyline now than there was 5 years ago. There's certainly more than there was 10 or 15. What do you like? What are you seeing that you think reflects that move toward quality? And what do you have on the boards maybe that's coming that you're excited about?
Well, I'll start with what I like. I think that as the trained landscape architect and planner, I'll leave what's on the boards for Matt. But 100% these public spaces that are very high quality, and high quality doesn't mean it doesn't necessarily mean fancy. It simply means populated by people. And these spaces that look incredibly informal and accidental take a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes to get them to that quality. Populated by, you know, the power of 10, right? The whole 10 things to do there, the amount of programming, the maintenance, that's one of my favorite things to see. Brought my dogs downtown to work last week on a Friday. We're a very dog-friendly office, FYI. And took them out to, and just ran into a handful of people at these public spaces. I would like to say that that is the case for all public spaces in the city of Detroit. Of course, that is not the case. But the high tide that's rising all ships is, of course, the economic enjoyment from the adjacent property owners from those public spaces. But that's definitely my favorite thing that I've seen. We can't get them all. We can't save all the starfish. Hopefully we're going to get a lot better at spreading that kind of improvement around, but it's definitely the high quality public spaces.
So you all are building or designing buildings to last for quite a while. Is there any consensus amongst your clients of what the future is going to look like? What's the next 5, 10 years? What their needs will be, and what these structures will have to do?
You got your crystal ball?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if I could answer that, I'd be a gazillionaire.
Well, well, I'll just jump in quickly in terms of talk about the needs.
Yeah.
Certainly the needs are still, if we're truly talking about, as we sort of teed up the conversation about mixed-use development, certainly the needs are housing for all. Buildings dynamically show longevity when there's places for everyone. Having places where everyone can call home, a diversity of economic attainability, a need for people to be able to age in place, to be able to sort of start at we can't continue to build these places for just empty nesters and sort of the fresh out of college kids. So that's definitely a need, and these places that can survive economic cycles. How can we build resilient communities that we know are going to be able to survive that economic downturn? And that certainly comes from this diversity of offerings for diverse people. It comes from the diversity of offerings for a diversity of lifestyles. That's the need. Where we're going to go with that, whether or not we're actually going to wake up and start providing what people need instead of just what's financially easy, that's another one.
I have one more quick question before we get to the audience. Steve, you said something when we were talking before we got up here that I want to have you repeat. I asked you whether you were fearful about the pace of development downtown and all of the new things that are being built and all the new space that's going to be available, and whether it's too much, whether the turn from the pandemic or other things will create empty space. And you said something that made me think completely differently about that question. So I want you to repeat it and then kind of expand on it.
Sure. I think I said it was something like, if you build it, they will come. It's having the offering. I mean, it's like so many of these great cities, they have an offering of a multitude of program, kind of like you were just saying, Amy, with respect to the diverse offerings. And all I've ever heard in downtown is the lack of Class A office space, the lack of hotel rooms, the lack of affordable housing. So the fact that we're doing a lot of that kind of development, I think it's great. I think that it also breeds optimism. And that's one of the things that, we were just saying that I still think we live in a fragile economy compared to a lot of robust cities of our size. And it's a little bit easier to change the tide here. Bad news and pessimism creates stalemate, and it creates overthinking and remaster planning as opposed to making stuff happen. And I think, what we've been seeing is a lot of energy, a lot of making things happen. It's given our city tons of great press, of attraction. I've never seen the amount of tourists in our city. I mean, tourism in Detroit 30 years ago, you didn't see anybody here walking around. Now it's really cool. We walk out of the office and there's you can tell people speaking different languages and different accents, from Ohio or something. But no, I think it's important to keep marching forward and stay optimistic.
Less, correct? And how do we get people engaged to kind of get back downtown? Not pre-COVID, but at least, get those numbers up a little bit. Like, what would you suggest?
Some of the things, yeah, but we've been we've been engaged in, it's like a tightrope walk. The balancing act of encouraging to convincing our staff to come back, it's been very successful. We started out a little overly heavy-handed, and we backed off. Then we've created a very flexible environment where now we have a kind of a requirement to be in 3 days a week with the other 2 days flexible, working from home. And we're getting easily half to 2/3 the folks down. But we're also making sure that we do some additional things, like we're having a lot more parties and bar time and folks in for dialogue, whether it's at bar time or lunch and learns and things. But we're very specific. It's almost like we're having to over-program ourselves. It's about work.
So you're saying the answer to getting people downtown is alcohol?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's alcohol. It's always been alcohol.
So everybody knows where we stand on that. It's definitely it can be a vicious cycle too. Like when you come down, it depends on what days you come down of town. It seems like Mondays you are out of luck if you still want something to eat. And and they're not open because the people aren't there. And we're not there because, well, if I can't even go out to lunch, then I think we're just continuing to inch our way along. But it has to be, but the only way to provide that is it has to be better than staying home. It's that simple. Because employers are offering options, it has to be a dynamic environment. I have to be able to get some benefit about having casual conversations with my coworkers, and I have to be able to walk around a dynamic downtown and find some places to, so I think we're definitely getting there. I think it's just gonna take a little more time.
I would also add, I think it also comes top down. I think our folks like to see me in, they like to see our leadership in, and that, that's encouraging. I'm coming down there, I'm looking forward to seeing them now.
How do you think that architecture plays a role in Detroit in competing with cities like Nashville and Austin on attracting young talent to come back and come downtown?
I'm not sure that it's necessarily architecture. I think that that's part of the answer, but I think the more important response is placemaking, and it's the things Amy opened up her remarks with, having an administration that really respects good urban planning policy, supports it, allows it. She's involved right now with so many incredible initiatives, from greenways to form-based codes and things that are creating community and creating places to be, as opposed to just the architecture. The architecture, of course, is near and dear to my heart, but I honestly think that comes second.
So did you just say that architecture can't?
Okay.
You heard it here,
for the
folks.
audience.
Architecture is not going to save everything. But I think that a lot of that is in the benefactors, right? Who's willing to see through it and not just get a building up? Who's willing to, these beautiful visionary buildings sometimes, usually, cost a little bit more, that you really, or a lot more. Having the vision and understanding that kind of impact will pay dividends, maybe not now, in the future, but it simply means that you're committed to, as I mentioned in the beginning, you're committed to quality. Our city is deserving of quality.
What will the impact of District Detroit be on downtown if it's built out?
I think it'll be huge. It's kind of amazing how long that's taken. The plans are pretty remarkable. There's some really great architects doing some great buildings. So I'm excited about seeing them, seeing that area come along, and that's going to be big impact stuff. There's some really interesting smaller scale things going on in Indian Village with Library Street Collective. They've got a dozen projects on 20 plus acres, and they're continuing to do these super creative almost little one-offs in neighborhoods, and they're bringing in world-class architects that would not come here normally, but because of the spirit and kind of soul of what they're doing and the imaginative side of it, these guys are getting involved, and they're practically doing it for free because they want to be part of a really interesting arts and culture district. So, that's the opposite kind of scale of what's happening.
Right. It was an ambitious plan, and you definitely, of course, you have to ask the really sticky questions. Because that's your job, that's what you do. But if the plan, including the public spaces, the affordable housing coupled with ownership and rental and all the things, it'll be amazing. I mean, that's what a lot of our work, as Matt mentioned, with Sports Global and Detroit Local, we understand the economic engine that comes of a sports anchored development. It's real. It can have lasting impact if a multitude of people can participate in that type of development, and I certainly hope that it comes through to fruition.
So you mentioned the need, the imperative really, to lean more into the idea of mixed use, right? That's what the population really is demanding. And yet, when I talk to developers in Detroit,
Oh my God, yes, I know.
I still
Yeah.
hear a lot of pushback. They all talk about how you can't make the numbers work here with mixed use. So tell me what is in their way, and what do we do to make that easier?
So, mixed-use development, and I'll just give my shameless plug for ULI. I serve on a couple of Urban Land Institute, serve on a couple of their product councils. They have a mixed-use development handbook that is really backed with a ton of economic data about how that happens. They identify or classify mixed use as three, not two, what we usually think, residential, commercial, residential and retail. So they think of it as three uses. They think of it as integrated development that's actually, and then of course the walkability, contiguous walkability. But if you were to unpack that, what is really needed and what they really identify are three uses that are all successful in their own right. What a lot of developers have done, and it's Herculean that they have done that, but they've planned the retail in these mixed use as loss leaders, so they know that this is not going to ultimately make money, which is not sustainable. I mean, unless it's just like a spec, like a coffee shop that's also like the one in Brush Park that's a senior development also, and it's also providing. So figuring out ways that this mixed use can truly be, and it might take a minute to figure that out. You're not gonna just say, hey, I'd like to lease out 6,000 square foot of retail space, and maybe it doesn't have to be traditional retail. Again, in the sports anchored world, we know there's a million offshoots from that, how you can play that game. It can be a community amenity, it can be an art amenity, it can be many things. And so we also know that that from the residential standpoint, that there have to be a diversity of housing types within that. So yes, I totally get it. Developers are saying that this is really difficult to do, but I think you simply, but I do believe that if you're creative and really open yourself up to the community, and not in terms of what can I sell, but what does that community need, and you're really open to that, that makes a huge difference in terms of how you can lease it off. I am not saying it's easy, and they're doing a great job, but I think that there's a way to get it done.
Matt and Amy, what makes Detroit unique for development compared to other large cities?
Well, it's unique, both positive and negative. We have this kind of bizarre cost of construction that is above average Chicago prices, but our lease rates are probably 30% less than those. So it's extraordinarily challenging, and again, because we are still getting going, and we're still, as I said, I think a bit fragile, and a lot of this stuff is new. So we're gaining momentum on that side of the coin.
Can you talk about what drives that difference between Detroit and Chicago? Why is it that much more expensive?
It's lack of trades. Well, I was going to say lack of building trades. We've had so much downfall. So many recessions here that other cities, way back going through the 70s and 80s, every decade has had a significant recession. and it takes a toll. Architects, we can't. We're hiring architects across the country to work remote because we can't get them here. And the trades are saying the same thing. They just cannot keep up with the workload. So what do? They charge higher prices. So again, it's about getting momentum. So trades are slowly starting to trickle back in and build the coffers to help that issue because wages are rising as well. So that's the negative side. The positive side is the opportunity for potential. There's a great welcoming for new ideas here that you don't see in other cities. Probably maybe because they've been there, done that. But there's a real positive look at that as opposed to poo-pooing something that somebody else may have tried. So there is this optimism for the new, and that helps.
What role does lighting play in making the city safe and creating spaces? And I know there's a big initiative many years ago with the Detroit Public Lighting Authority to make the city safe for relighting the spaces. So what role do you see lighting in the past or the future has that played?
So, I mean, it's everything, right? If the streets aren't lit, people aren't going to feel safe. I think that, again, I mentioned starting off my career as a landscape architect, I did a lot of streetscapes. Do you remember? Everything was streetscape. We were putting brick pavers everywhere and all kinds of cute knickknacks and doodads and everything. And one of the, this is something that I feel really passionately about, is really good streets. They don't need much. And we're always over investing in things like fancy light fixtures. There's always new something. Let's just get it lit. Get something that is very easy to maintain, something that can be a power source that can be changed out by multitudes of people. It's incredibly important, and it has to be. It shows this is a place of investment. It shows this is a place of integrity and a place of safety. I mean, it's critical.
100 years ago, Detroit enjoyed an era of sort of renown for its architecture. Those buildings that were erected in the 20s and what have you. When you look at what's going up today, are we earning a place of architectural note with today's structures?
Some. I would, I know my friends in the car industry don't like to hear me say this, but the automotive industry had, such a death grip on everything Detroit with respect to it. It grew into the culture, all of everything and anything you could think of. And at one point in time, we had fabulously designed cars and with fabulous quality. And there were car designers in charge of design. And then bean counters got in charge of design. And the 70s and 80s, and you just watch just look at car design, look at the quality. That had an impact on the entire culture here of design. The design went from like a big D to a little d to a disappearing D. Design does, great design and great planning is thoughtful, and it does take time. It's a little bit extra, and in an era of getting things done, yesterday, designs get pulled off off the board way too early. And unfortunately, we saw a lot of that, and that started to impact buildings. And I just remember we went through an era ourselves of doing these, schlocky developer office buildings in the suburbs. And there was just a proliferation of that. Put it up as fast and cheap as we can so we can get, our leasable rates out of it. I'm seeing over the last, 10, 20 years, we've had a significant, reversal of that. I think that, I personally think Dan Gilbert and his crew have done an amazing job with places like Shinola Hotel, what they're doing with the Hudson's building. It's going to be pretty fantastic, bringing back the book building to its, former glory. And those projects, I know the economics, those projects they're probably 50, 100-year paybacks for them. But, it's putting a place in the sand. It's like setting a bar. It's re-upping that bar to see what great spaces, what great design can be like.
Hello, everyone. So I have a question regarding the future of transit, how it will affect downtown, because I think the future of like this whole region lies in transit connectivity, not only through like downtown and the neighborhoods, but also downtown and the surrounding suburbs, especially as downtown densifies more and more. Like you have to get people off of like being car-centric.
So, hi. So the question, of course, you're going to ask the transit question. So, what's the role, or what role does it have in a downtown?
Yeah, kind of how the future of transit will affect like downtown, especially since like Corktown, Michigan Station is like the hop, skip, and throw away.
Right.
Downtown Central Business District.
Right. So it continues to be, just like our great question about lighting, it continues to be the challenge, in addition to how do we get these projects funded, a conundrum that we have not solved. Worked on the TOD studies for the Q line back when that was the M1 rail, with the notion that before we can solve all of our local, all of our larger, more regional transit systems, when people arrive in the downtown, they have to have a way to get around car-free. We have our 5 spokes in this city. Historically, those have all enjoyed streetcars. It's a problem that I think that we need to continue to hammer. It's critical simply because of the costs from owning a car in the city, not just the city of Detroit, but regionally in Detroit, especially if you're looking at 2-car families. It's unbelievable in terms of the amount of take-home pay that families are spending on owning and operating a car. The pandemic rolled back a lot of efforts, unfortunately, because the roads were less congested and traveled. People tend to, I think, sort of taken their eye off the ball with that. But it's something that we simply have to commit to, and something that we have to continue to move forward with. And I think from, as far as Detroit goes, continuing, just like it was, there's no new idea under the sun, continuing to focus our denser development around those corridors and allowing people to move throughout those systems, either walkable in smaller districts or by some sort of local distributor, is going to be really important. But we have to continue to hammer it.
So autonomous vehicles are not the answer?
No. Well, no, not yet, right? Right. Not yet.
There's a great example. I don't know if you've explored Metro Denver, but they've done the opposite of what we try to do here, and that all of the neighboring cities and counties all pulled in line to create a greater Metro Denver connectivity. And it didn't matter to them, and all of these fabulous mixed-use developments, sprouted around the stops, of course, as you'd expect, especially on a light rail, because you're not going to, it's not like a bus route that can change one day to another, but it's tracks in the ground. And they attract collectively. So if business is moving into Metro Denver, doesn't like one town, well, then the neighboring, they help encourage them to stay in Metro Denver and maybe go to the neighboring town. So it's a mindset that we also need to challenge within Metro Detroit.
We can take
Question
one more.
right there.
We've got one more question here, or I'm sorry, you've already got a mic.
All right. So Amy, you used a term, and it was amenities. And that seems to be kind of a theme that both of you wove through some of your responses, particularly when you were speaking about getting people back to the office and the fact that, alcohol is a great enticement, but what else do people like? And people tend to like amenities.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about
Sure.
how that might change both future of the workplace, but also the future of a downtown?
So you open up any developer blog, there's always what are the new amenities? And there's always a study. There's always something going on in terms of what's going to attract people. We've been using lately this mnemonic device that's a stretch at best: dogs, blogs, and jogs. And basically dogs because people love dogs, and the amenities that come with that. Blogs, and that basically means these small working small spaces. If we're thinking an apartment building, a small little room that you could conduct business if you have if you're a blogger or some sort of independent business of some sort. And then jogs is, again, because it rhymed. And the notion of health in some way. Those seem to be the ones that are the most common. Whatever the building is, you have to be regional about it. You have to be sensitive to what's needed from an employee standpoint or from a residential standpoint. But from an amenity standpoint, you have to know that it's going to change, for sure. Don't overinvest in it and be willing to adapt. Make sure that you are ferociously protecting in your operational budget dollars for people to make sure everything is clean and beautiful, providing service. And then lastly, if you're in a high amenity area, if you're in a place where there's already a really active retail environment, a place where you're across the street from a dog park, you're probably going to pay more for that piece of dirt that you bought, but you're going to be able to draft off of all the amenities that a rich, walkable neighborhood can provide.
Hello. You mentioned earlier how to get young people to stay downtown and live there.
Yeah.
I'm 22. I just moved.
Where do you live?
Corktown.
Okay.
I just moved there.
How are you doing?
I love it there, actually.
Okay.
But there's not a lot of young people there, at least my age. They're all in Royal Oak, or Ferndale, or at home, or wherever. But how do you think these large developments like District Detroit, Lewis, stuff in Corktown, Perennial, will get people to move back, people my age to move back down here? Or do you think it'll take time, or is it more of a retail?
Well, let me turn this back and ask you a couple of questions. Why do you live in Corktown? Why did you pick where you lived?
I'm from Chicago originally.
Yeah.
And I graduated from MSU, and Plant Moran picked me up. And so I decided if I'm going to live in Michigan, I want to live in the city. And I think that's a common thought, but majority of people my age go to Chicago or the bigger hubs. And so I think with time maybe Detroit will come back, but
so yeah,
it's more of a thought than
no, I think that and again, things are simply, you're going to pay. You probably would have paid. You could have gone to Chicago. You're going to pay a lot more than you do. I think that there's a definite, Detroit is definitely for people that really are willing to hustle. And the notion of there's a little bit of a big fish, small pond mentality in Detroit in terms of you can do a lot more. And your question about how do we continue to attract, we're going to attract with this visionary mindset in terms of we're going to get there someday. And we're providing the jobs. There's a lot of amazing things happening in terms of the opportunities from a job standpoint, and just continuing to hammer on providing this density of amenities and these places to eat. And I'm not going to use the term live, work, play. I'm going to come up with something else for that. But the reality is, you can do so much more with your money here, and people that are really willing to have a higher quality of lifestyle because of that.
I would also add, a lot of it depends on your perspective. And you said if Detroit comes back, it is coming back. And you know, these two guys on the sides here, they probably remember when I moved back here in the 80s from New York. It was no joke. There were tumbleweeds, rolling down Woodward, and not on a Saturday, and not a single soul in sight. I mean, it was different. So I see a lot of great things happening. The momentum is slow, but if you just look at the history books on like how shitty Soho was in the 60s, with garbage piling up for months. And I mean, places have, their cycles. Paris, New York, they have their cycles.
Not Paris right now.
Not right away.
In a couple weeks, hopefully.
Okay. So they have their cycles. I mean, the cities are they're like organisms, and a lot of it depends on stewardship, and so we've got much better stewardship over the last so many years, and it's going. It's just slower than all of us would wish.
I always tell this quick story when people ask me that question about is it coming back, and I grew up here in the 70s and 80s, and then left later as an adult and lived away, and I came back in 2007 from the East Coast, and literally everybody in Washington said it's crazy, right? Why would you go back to Detroit? I said, well, it's home. But I lived downtown when I got back. This is 2007. And one fall Sunday, I came out of my apartment, and there was a group from Chicago there, Bears fans. The Lions were playing the Bears that afternoon. And they stopped me, and they said, hey, this is right in Grand Circus Park. They said, we're in town for the game. It's early. We want to go get a cup of coffee. Where can we do that? And I literally stood on that corner and turned around in a 360 degrees circle and said, yeah, I don't know. There isn't a place to do that. Now, if I came out of that building on a Sunday morning today, I'd have a million places. They wouldn't have asked me because they would have seen all the places there. And so think about what's happened between 2007 and now. We've had the auto bankruptcy, we've had the municipal bankruptcy, and we've had a pandemic, and things are still moving forward, right? I mean, we've had things that kind of trip us up every once in a while, but things are still getting better. That's the first time I can say that in my life in Detroit, that we've had 16, almost 17 years of pretty steady progress. So that's the thing that to me tells me it's real this time, and I don't know what the end point is, but as long as we're kind of moving forward, I think that's real progress.
So Matt and Amy, before we go, I think we need to acknowledge our place. We're sitting here at Mary Grove in this beautiful, beautiful hall. As architects, as designers, you walk in a room like this, what goes through your mind?
Nostalgia. I mean, it's interesting that not just how this space feels, because you walk in and you don't even have to, you have to be an architecture major to feel good about it. It's just, there's a certain, just, you get it. And cities are like that too, and places are like that. When you walk into, like, you remember, how Capitol Park feels today. It sure didn't feel like that 10, 15 years ago. But, these places, the way sidewalks address buildings and parks, it's a sense, and we try to employ the feeling. You're not gonna imitate this because that's what Disney does best, but you do wanna recreate the sensation
And
that you feel.
And the notion of just reverence, and I know nothing about how this beautiful campus was constructed, but I would guess that they employed a ton of local artisans. A lot people came in from and committed for a year plus to do glass work, to do glazing and tile work, and there was a reverence and a respect for all of the trades that came with that. Each one of those people was not just a laborer, they were an expert and an artisan in their own field. I think I read an article that in the Times as well, that there's been a 1% margin in the shift to trade schools starting to tick back up again, which hopefully it's not just a blip, but I think people are starting to realize sometimes the sham that college can, sometimes be, but that's what I think of. I think of all the individual absolute artisans and experts that were committed to this, and then of course the commitment to quality that we started this conversation with.
But I would also say there's two words. This is investment and not cost. We get, in our developments, we get so hung up on cost, and if you look at it as investment and it's done properly, it has way more give back. Cost, if you're only focused on cost, you're gonna do it cheap, you're gonna do it poorly, and you're not gonna focus on the return. And so I just think this to me looks like an investment.
Good. Well, Matt, Amy, Nolan, Stephen, you guys are a terrific group up here. Give them a round of applause, please.
Support for this program provided by